Thanks. We'll be sitting eventually. I'm going to stand for a bit if I could. You can sit, though. I don't want you to get tired. The auditor gets tired, so we got to give him a break. Donald said, delighted to be here. I'm the one that's delighted to be here. First of all, my compliments to LNH, to the Literary and Historical Society. And I travel around a good bit, speaking to universities, speaking to businesses, speaking to sports teams about leadership. And I think this might be the first one where it's entirely organized and run by students, which I think is a great credit to UCD, to you, Donald, and Sinead, your team, and you who are here with some interest in what I have to say. I expect, otherwise you wouldn't be here, because I don't remember recalling that this was impressed upon you. I think you're here because you have some questions, and I promise I'll get them to you. Before I do that, I have had a very interesting and blessed career. One of my West Point classmates and his wife, Bill and Ann Higgs, have joined me for the trip over to do this event and also to enjoy a bit of Ireland. And some of you know that I'm the grandson of 4 Irish immigrants. But I'll get to that in a second. And this is my wife, Deanie, who keeps me grounded. So about a year ago, I got an award from Time magazine. And they named me one of the 100 of the world's most influential leaders. So my staff, or in particular my auditor, came in and said, you're not going to believe this, General, but they just named you as one of Time magazine's 100 most influential leaders in the world. And I said, I really don't believe it. And he said, why? And I said, well, I'm really not even one of the most influential people in my house. And Deanie's here to attest for that fact. So if there's any questions that I actually fumble along with, she'll probably jump in and help me answer them. Interestingly, I really was excited, even though you try not to be excited about things like that. And when I knew it was coming out, I rushed to the newsstand and I grabbed 10 copies off the shelf, even without looking at them. And I got up to the counter and I put them down, and guess whose face was on the cover of that magazine? Kanye West. And I flipped into the part of the book where I was actually located, and it was in World Security Leaders, and I was right next to Kim Jong-un. So I said, you know what? I'm probably okay with not being in this magazine, so I won't take it too seriously. I don't know how I got where I got. Maybe that's the first message I'd like to leave you all with is, history's going to find some of you, but you can't tell which of you it's going to find. And therefore, all of you have a bit of an obligation to yourselves, to your family, to your country, to your friends, to be ready if history finds you. And that's kind of the way I tried to approach it, because I said I was the grandson of 4 Irish immigrants. The one I was closest to, and it was Donegal and Mayo on my maternal side, and it was Roscommon and Sligo on my father's side. The one I got to know the best was my grandmother, Bridget, who was from Castlebar, County Mayo. And I got to know her best because both my parents worked. I was number 1 grandchild, and you know what a wonderful experience that can be. All the love, all the attention, all the discipline, all of everything. But in this case, it was all about Grandma Bridget, so I'd go up to see her every day, and because she cared for me, meaning she was the babysitter, I suppose. And she would take it upon herself to make sure that I knew first and foremost that I was Irish. Later on, I came to the conclusion I was also Catholic. And then a distant third, I finally figured out, oh my God, I'm an American. Because the way we lived in those days, back in this particular part of New Jersey, it was very neighborhoods were very ethnically isolated. Eventually, it all kind of blurred together. But Grandma Bridget was quite something, and she came over when she was 16, and came through Ellis Island. And last May, I actually received the Ellis Island Medal of Honor, not because of me, but because of her, really. And I have this image of her. I've never been able to document it, but I have this belief that as she was coming ashore at Ellis Island with, the one bag she was able to carry at 16 years of age, that as she stood in line, because the lines tended to be a little lengthy, that there were probably a couple of, let's make it up, some Polish guys standing behind her, chatting up about what they're going to accomplish in the new world. And my guess is she turned to them and said, look, you guys just pay attention, because my grandson's going to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And if you knew my grandmother, there's no doubt she would have said something like that, but it wasn't exactly that. So what I want to talk to you about real briefly is the only Joyce quote that I actually cared for. Joyce is a hard guy to embrace, frankly. I mean, I know you know that, and I hope I just didn't lose the award. But James Joyce is a bit elusive for almost anyone except those who are dogged enough and determined enough to fight their way into that prose. But he did have a saying that I think is actually relevant and to this little gathering today, and it was, "In the particular is contained the universal." So what in the particular is contained the universal? So why should you care what happened to me in my life or what I've learned? Because there's something universal about some of the things I've learned. And to the extent you can latch on to something in that universality, I think it might be useful to you. So I'm going to talk, as I said, the entire speech here is going to be about 15 minutes. I think I've just used up about 5 or 6 before we get to your questions. So let me say this. I think it's going to be harder for you to lead in your time than it was for me to lead in mine. And I could give you 100 reasons that's true, but I'll just give you one, and that's the scrutiny under which leaders lead today. It's intense. You can see some of it playing out in U.S. politics. Even while we're sitting here, somebody's probably tweeting someplace. And the intense scrutiny that kind of coalesces around that makes it hard to lead with the kind of deliberateness that maybe you'd like to lead. You'd rather lead in a deliberate fashion. But in a world where the intensity is so intense, and a world where information is both far more accessible than it ever was, and far faster than it ever was, so that now everybody all the time, everywhere, all the time, can have information at their fingertips. I challenge you to tell me, and it changed, by the way, in 2011, I think. That's my date, and I'm sticking to it. Why 2011? How many of you have an iPhone 4? Of course you don't, and you wouldn't admit it if you did. How many of you have a 5, a 6, or a 7? Yeah, most of you. And that makes you mobile. It makes you. It allows you to get things at a much higher resolution. It allows you to be on, to be connected all the time and pretty much learn whatever you want to learn. It also means that leaders are competing at the speed of memes. Now think about that. A meme, as you know, which passes from person, by the way, the word came into the dictionary long before you were alive. It came in 1976. And it meant the act of a style or a culture, an idea, pass. You're just impressed that I knew the word, right? So it came in 76 to mean that things would pass from individual to individual. And of course, that was true until, it's still passing from individual to individual. But now it passes at the speed of the internet. And so leaders have to understand that they're competing for the trust and confidence of those they lead at the speed of memes. And you are. And by the way, the next thing I'm going to talk to you about is the most important responsibility of a leader, which is to establish a sense of belonging in those that follow you. But if you're doing that in the world of digital echoes, let's call it, where ideas echo, and once they echo, they begin to build, and where they can actually make it a little bit confusing about what's factual and what's not factual. You've heard people talk about alternative facts and a lack of uncommon facts. It's true. It's true. It's hard to actually grasp onto something that we might agree is a common fact, and in so doing kind of coalesce around it, unless you work at it. So my generation of leaders have kind of been a little bit overwhelmed by that, and you can't be overwhelmed by that. You've got to understand this. In an era of digital echoes, it is your personal responsibility, if you call yourself a leader, to gain the trust and confidence of those who follow you. And you can only do it if you're in that competition. Doesn't mean you have to be tweeting all the time. Here's what it does mean. You got to make sure that the people who work for you, with you, on whom you count and on whom they count on you, that you build a genuine sense of belonging among them. And I'll give you one quick vignette, and then we're going to go to Q&A. 1974, I graduated from West Point, as Bill did. He went to Texas, I went to Germany. I got the better end of the deal, I think. But I went to Germany to do patrolling along the border between Czechoslovakia, which was Warsaw Pact Soviet Union, and NATO and the United States, and the Federal Republic of Germany. And you know, the border was the border was long, but my piece of it was about 70 kilometers wide, and my piece of it was forested, no fences, you know, mostly little border stones. And so fundamentally, we were mostly there to make sure nobody wandered over to Czechoslovakia from West Germany, but also to make sure they didn't wander over. And so we would patrol that border, and it was a very isolated tour. We were out there for 30 days at a time. Our main camp was back closer to Nuremberg, Germany. But anyway, so we would go out and patrol, and I had a camp, about 50 or so soldiers. The camp was only about 100 meters on each side, a very small, isolated. Quonset huts, you know, those half-moon tin shacks, one for living, one for a dining facility, one for a headquarters, a motor pool, probably 30 or 40 Jeeps, you know, the kind with no tops on them and all. And so one day we had a patrol out on the border, and when the patrol was out, I would always, you know, be alert because I wanted to make sure it didn't go into Czechoslovakia, and if it had, I'd have lost my job almost immediately. So I had a real interest in this. And so I was focused, listening to the reports on the radio. There was no navigational aids in those days, you know, no GPS, no Waze, no Uber, nothing, none of that stuff. And so it was all maps and terrain features and high adventure. But I was at the border camp watching this thing occur, and a gate guard came in. I should tell you that the army in those days was not, my army was not populated with solid citizens. It was a draft army. So they made you come in. And generally when they make you come in, you're not as happy about things as if you volunteer to do them. So about half of those 50 soldiers didn't want to be there. There was huge racial issues. There was huge drug issues. I mean, really bad drug issues that had come back from Vietnam and came through Turkey and other places. So the gate guard comes in and he said, "Sir, you have to come back to the gate with me." I said, "I'm a little busy right now." He said, "No, you have to come, sir. There's a nun at the gate." And I said, the first thing I thought about was, my God, I really do have drug problems in this unit. Because remember, I tell you, we're in the middle of a German forest, you know, at least 10 kilometers from anybody else. I said, "Come on, man, I'm in the middle of the patrol here." I said, there's no gate. He said, "Sir, I'm telling you, there's a nun there." I said, "Okay, well, go back and tell the nun that I'm busy and I can't come to the gate." And off he goes. And I didn't have any credibility in the report. But anyway, about 5 minutes later, he comes back. I'm still up to my ears in the mission. And he said, "Sir, the nun won't leave." And I thought to myself, maybe it is a nun. Because if there's somebody at the gate who won't leave, it probably is a nun. Only a nun would say that, right? So anyway, so I said, okay. So by now the patrol's out of the border camp. I mean, it's coming back. It's not near the border. So I go out to the gate, and I'll be damned, a nun. And I mean, you know, instantaneously recognizable as a nun. 5'2" by 5'2", you know, all dressed in black, white bib, I mean, the whole thing. And I walked up not knowing what to expect, and she said, "How you doing, Lieutenant? I'm Sister Mary Cecilia, and I'm here to pray with your soldiers." And I said, "Oh my God, where are you from?" She said, "Milwaukee." And I said, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "We just opened up a convent in a little German town nearby, and I heard you were here, and I'm over here because I want to pray with your soldiers." And I thought, I'm just not ready for this. I mean, you know, you just don't open a gate and let a nun in the gate. You know, even then we thought Russia were spies, and so I didn't know what was coming after me. So I talked her out of trying to force her way in that day, and I said, "Please come back another time. I'm a little busy." It was a lie. I'm probably going to hell, but I said it. And off she goes. I asked her if she needed a ride. "No, thank you." And there she goes down the forest trail. So I go back to work. 2 weeks later, "Sir, there's a nun at the gate." And I said, "God damn it, there, she's back." But by now I'd thought about it. I checked her out. There was no spies allegedly dressed like nuns in the German forest. And so I was ready to let her in. But I went to the gate. I said, "Look, sir, I'm going to let you in, sister, but you have to understand, we can't make soldiers pray. It's just one of our things, you know. So I'll bring you around. You do your best, and we'll see what happens." And so I should mention that on the way to the gate, I had passed 8 of my soldiers playing basketball on a little makeshift basketball court. And they happened to be the 8 that that I was afraid of. They were just rough soldiers. So as I walked by, I had mental note, there they are. We're going to stay away from them. And I get to the gate. I let her in. I said, "Okay, sister, where do you want to start?" She said, "There." And she points to the basketball court. I said, "No, sister, we are not going to go on the basketball court." And she said, "Why not?" And I said, "You know, sister, they're just not my best soldiers." I kind of fumbled a little bit with it. And she said, "Okay," and there she went. That's how another way I knew she was really a nun. So there she goes, and she's now walking into the middle of this basketball game. with these mostly African-American, big, muscular, mean-looking, not all African-American, but enough of them. And she walks into the middle of them, and they stop. They had to stop. She was right in the middle of them. And I said, okay, men, this is Sister Mary Cecilia. She's from Milwaukee. Anybody from Milwaukee? They didn't say a word. They were just glaring at me, And she's here to pray with you. But now, if you don't want to pray with her, just, you can just take a moment away from the game, let her pray with those that do. I'm going to step over here, and I'm going to watch, because I didn't want any part of this, frankly. So I walked over. By the time I turned around, 8 soldiers like this. I thought, there is no way she just pulled that off. But she did. And then she went like a buzzsaw all around the camp, grabbing soldiers who were otherwise busy, convincing them they should take a moment to pray, praying with them. And then I'm shortening the story a little bit, but she said, okay, I'm done. I'll be back next week, but I'll go home now. And I said, would you like a ride today home? And she said, yeah, I would like a ride today. I said, okay, sister, I'll get a Jeep. We'll get somebody to drive you. She said, no, I want you to drive me. Okay, sister, I'll drive you. So we get in the Jeep, no top on the Jeep. I'm driving. All of her stuff is flying all over the place, slapping me in the face. I'm trying to get down to Forest Road. We get to the convent. Sure enough, there was a convent. And she said, hey, can I ask you something? I said, of course you can, sister. She said, back there at that camp, you didn't want me to talk to those 8 soldiers on the basketball court. I said, that's right, sister, I didn't. She said, why? I said, well, they just weren't, they just weren't my best soldiers. And she said, but they're yours, right? I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, they're all your soldiers, right? You told me you had 50 of them, and those 8 were yours, right? I said, of course they were, sister. And she said, well, you haven't given up on them, have you? And I thought, oh, my God. Out of the mouth of a nun in the middle of a German forest telling me a lesson about leadership. I had given up on them in retrospect. So I went back, drove back. I'm thinking the whole way, good, darn that nun, making me feel guilty about being a platoon leader. And I get back, I walk up, they're still playing basketball, and I ripped off my shirt and asked them if I could get in the game. But here's the lesson. At that very first moment in my career, I came to the understanding, the important understanding, that if someone is following you, you can't give up on them. They can give up on you, and some of them did. Some of those 8 soldiers had done some things that were just criminal. I mean, assault and multiple drug offenses and theft. And so I think I probably saved 4 out of the 8 of them. But from that day, at whatever level I was, young officer, senior officer, and in your case, young executives, senior executives, here's my message. If they belong to you, you've got to develop a sense of belonging. It's your responsibility to develop in them a sense of belonging. And if you do and don't give up on them, you're generally going to be pleasantly surprised. And that is the way to get through this period of uncertainty that I just described to you, by making it part of every day when you're a leader, making it part of every day to make the people who are with you feel like they belong. You do that, they're not going to go look for it someplace else. You don't do that, they're going to go look for it someplace else. And it might be on the internet, it might be downtown, it might be, who knows where it'll be. But it's your responsibility as a leader. Okay, I'm going to leave you with 2 other thoughts. A Yeats quote. I have to balance off Joyce with Yeats because he's more understandable. Yeats said this in the middle of the Irish Troubles: talent perceives differences. Genius, unity. We got plenty of talent in the world today who are identifying all of the differences among us. We don't have enough genius. I don't know how you develop that. I mean, in my own life, I could tell you how I tried, about trying to develop the ability to make people come together, not drive them apart. But I think Yeats is right. Almost anyone has a little talent and enough to define differences. Few of us have enough interest, enthusiasm, and ability to use their genius to bring people together. And if you look around the world today, it seems to me there's more need for that than others. So finally, the people ask me, what do you want to be remembered for? So I took everything I just told you about and a couple of other things. And I said, if I could actually write my epitaph, I would like it to say he led with a warrior's heart. Got to have heart. An immigrant's optimism, because immigrants are they're by nature, they're optimistic. And a servant's soul. If you lead as though you're serving the others, the people that follow you, your instincts will generally be true. Okay, that's my lecture portion of this series. You are now free to ask me questions. Thank you.